Dames en heren, goedemiddag. Collega's, goedemiddag. Vandaag neemt een bijzonder persoon, een bijzonder hoogleraar, zij het gewoon hoogleraar, afscheid van onze universiteit, afscheid van onze School of Business and Economics. Professor Dr. Chris de Neubourg, Professor of Comparative Economic Studies at Maastricht University and at our School of Business and Economics, will indeed leave the university. Fact. Professor de Neubourg houdt zijn afscheidsreden vanmiddag. Fact. Fact. Professor de Neubourg is, net zoals het ongrijpbare meisje, een zeer ongrijpbare jongen. Fact. Na zoveel feiten gaan we even over, niet naar de fictie, maar naar de mythe de Neubourg. Ik heb uiteraard niet het genoegen gehad om professor de Neubourg van bij het begin aan onze faculteit, aan onze universiteit, gekend te hebben als collega. Ik heb ook vernomen dat Chris niet de founding father van dag 1 was, maar misschien wel van dag 2, 3, 4 en een bijzondere nalatenschap, indruk nalaat aan onze faculteit. En collega professor Muiske gaat inhoudelijk daar zeer zeker op in, zodra ik hem het woord geef na deze korte inleiding, die vooral Chris zal schetsen als persoon. En ik wil me verontschuldigen, want ik weet dat allemaal niet, maar ik heb zeer goede bronnen in onze faculteit. Dat misschien wel een Neubourg familiebedrijfje is, dreigt te worden, misschien ook altijd geweest is, Chris. En dat zijn zeer gewaardeerde collega's. Dus ik heb het over informatie. Eén, en dat is ook nog een fact, het laatste fact, is dat Chris een afscheidsrede houdt op een vrijdagnamiddag om 4:30 als laatste, omdat deze gemeenschap, deze academische gemeenschap, geen risico wilde nemen en de tijd van anderen zou opnemen, hebben we Chris op het laatste van het laatste gezet, zodanig dat we rustig kunnen uitlopen, Chris. Dus no worries, no constraints. Goed, Chris is een people person. Daar kan ik echt ook van getuigen. Zeer warm, zeer loyaal. Hij woont trouwens ook in een kleine gemeente dichtbij de stad, Chris, waar ik ben opgegroeid, maar vandaar kennen we elkaar niet. Maar Chris is altijd gefascineerd en gefascineerd gebleven door het verhaal achter de mensen. Hij weet altijd wie wat doet, hoe ze heten, hoeveel kinderen ze hebben, waar ze vandaan komen, etc. Dat is heel belangrijke informatie voor Chris. En terecht, denk ik. Hij weet ook alle voornamen van alle studenten, nieuwe studenten, oudere studenten, afgestudeerden van de Maastricht Graduate School of Governance, die hij ook allemaal persoonlijk verwelkomde. Bijvoorbeeld, zelfs als deze persoon 3 moeilijke Afrikaanse voornamen had, dan was Chris altijd in staat om zeer correct deze voornamen te noemen. De deur stond bij hem ook altijd open, als hoogleraar, maar ook als mens, getuigen de feestjes die Chris steeds als bijzonder warm persoon organiseerde. Chris maakt ook altijd tijd voor je. Werk en privé lopen nog steeds positief door elkaar heen, zijn niet te scheiden, heb ik vernomen, Chris. En een volle eettafel ten huize de Neubourg is absoluut geen gekke gewoonte. Chris is ook bijzonder loyaal. Loyaal aan de mensen rondom hem, aan zijn familie en aan de instellingen waarvoor hij werkt. Hij is ook zeer royaal. Vooral als royaal in het teken staat van goed eten. Chris heeft met mij gezegd, pakt altijd uit. Grandeur. Niet de grandeur de folie. Hij verwacht echter van zichzelf zeer veel, verwacht dat ook van zijn staf, maar verzorgde ze ook goed. Is een caring employer. PhD-studenten, medewerkers hebben het vaak nog over de feesten in de tuin in Teuven en in Maastricht. Het schijnt, Chris, dat je ooit in de tuin in Teuven in het prachtige gazon een gat gegraven hebt in je chique pak voor het kampvuur van het feest. Er zijn zelfs foto's van, dus dat zou ook factual kunnen zijn. Niets was te veel, er was altijd en ook altijd lekker en veel eten. Eten van de beste traiteurs, patisserieën en delicatessenzaken. De governance had ook een eigen keuken. En ik verwijs daar naar eerdere publicaties in een wel zeer geciteerde krant, De Observant, van een aantal jaren terug. Hij haalde ze ook allemaal zelf op in een auto die ik met hem deel. Niet die auto, maar het merk althans. Waar haalde hij die tijd vandaan? Chris maakte gewoon tijd. Hij maakt die tijd om met, zoals gezegd, de meeste grandeur maaltijden thuis voor te schotelen. Ik heb ook vernomen dat een jetlag hier en daar absoluut geen impact heeft op het ritme en het levensritme van Chris. Sebastian en Elise hebben als kleine kinderen uren door de gang van SBI gedraald, heeft men mij verteld, wachtende op papa, die toch nog altijd even iets moest afmaken. Jarenlang heeft deze tekening van Sebastian op zijn bureau gestaan, een volledig ingekleurd, gedetailleerde tekening met de tekst: papa, stop toch met werken. Er wordt nu nog steeds heel hard om gelachen in de familie. Hoe goed zijn kinderen de geheime hoekjes van SBI wel niet moeten kennen. Eindelijk dan naar huis met de kinderen en dan krijgen de kinderen opnieuw een existentiële angstaanval van wie zouden we tegenkomen op de parking en met wie zou Chris dan ook nog eens een half uur en langer praten. Hard werken en reizen. Chris reist ook nu nog meer dan ooit. Hij is altijd bezig met een of ander spannend project, altijd plannen. Het ziet er ook niet naar uit dat hij ooit zal stoppen met werken en reizen. Pensioen, bestaat dat woord in de Neubourg Dictionary? Men twijfelt eraan. We zijn allen bang dat hij niet goed weet wat dat is. Hard werken en genieten gaan goed samen bij Chris. Als hij belt, weet je nooit in welke tijdzone hij zich begeeft. Dat kan vanuit Mauritius, New York, Tokio of een of ander spannend Afrikaans land. Hij had het vaak zo druk dat echtgenote Jo of een van de familieleden die nu ook tot onze familie behoren, de declaraties bij Joyce moesten inleveren. En dat moeten ook heel wat declaraties geweest zijn. Met de woorden van Chris: met ambiguïteit van je bazen kan je niet leven. Mag ik als, niet echt baas, misschien ook eens stellen dat het ook niet altijd makkelijk is om met de ambiguïteit van medewerkers te leven als baas. En ambiguïteit, Chris, is, denk ik, een hele goede eigenschap aan een academische instelling. Ongrijpbaar, geniaal, aanvullend. Aanvullen zal Johan Muisken, professor Muisken, doen. En ik geef professor Muisken met graagte de vloer.
Mijn excuses, ik wist helemaal niet dat we vooraf moesten spreken, maar bij deze. Beste Chris, in de ogen van velen heb je afscheid genomen van Maastricht in 2010, toen je vertrok naar Florence. We waren allemaal vol bewondering, en ook een beetje jaloers, dat je erin was geslaagd om na een turbulent jaar in Maastricht weer zo'n mooie baan in zo'n mooie plaats te bemachtigen. De verrassing was dan ook groot toen bleek dat je vandaag, ongeveer 5 jaar later, een afscheidsrede ging houden. En die verrassing was er ook omdat je dat helemaal niet zelf hebt aangekondigd en niemand persoonlijk hebt uitgenodigd. Heel onkarakteristiek voor jou. Velen van ons vernamen dan ook op indirecte wijze van je afscheidsrede en relatief laat. Dat maakt dat verschillende collega's die graag je afscheid hadden willen bijwonen, andere verplichtingen hebben. Wat mij betreft had je een drukker bezocht afscheid verdiend. Overigens sta ik hier mede namens de vakgroep Algemene Economie, vooral namens AE2, want onze huidige voorzitter Tom van Veen is helaas verhinderd. Je bent vlak na de oprichting van de faculteit de Economische Wetenschappen al naar Maastricht gekomen. Meer dan 30 jaar geleden, in januari 1985. En je hebt daar 20 jaar lang gewerkt, tot je in 2005 de School of Governance oprichtte. In die 20 jaar heb je ontzettend veel bijgedragen aan de ontwikkeling van de faculteit en van de vakgroep Algemene Economie, waar je deel van uitmaakte. Ik had erop gespeculeerd dat onze decaan een hele lijst van je facultaire bijdragen zou opnoemen, en ik had er ook op gespeculeerd dat hij zou hebben vergeten te vermelden dat je de organisatie van de grote congressen van EEA en ESEM in 1994 op je hebt genomen als grote kartrekker die erg hebben bijgedragen aan de naamsbekendheid van de universiteit. En ik had er ook op gespeculeerd dat hij zou vergeten de inspanning voor de werving van studenten in het begin, waaraan jij samen met Peter de Gijzel enorm veel hebt gedaan, dat die toch ook echt wel speciale vermelding verdienen. Voor de vakgroep was een van je meest zichtbare bijdragen de oprichting van International Economic Studies en het werven van internationale studenten daarvoor. Dat was voor cruciaal belang voor ons voortbestaan. Maar zeker zo belangrijk zijn jouw minder zichtbare bijdragen voor onze ontwikkeling geweest. Daar heb ik de laatste weken wat meer over nagedacht. Dat zijn bijdragen die voortvloeien uit jouw persoonlijkheid, uit wie je bent. Daar kom ik net zoals Philippe toch wel op uit. En die zijn waarschijnlijk van onschatbare waarde voor iedere organisatie waarin je werkt. Zonder daar nu een rangorde in te willen aanbrengen, denk ik aan ten eerste je enorme betrokkenheid bij en loyaliteit naar je omgeving. Ten tweede je inspirerende creativiteit. Ten derde je brede belangstelling en belezenheid. En ten vierde je grote hart voor onderwijs. Al deze 4 eigenschappen hebben van de meet af aan een stempel op je werkomgeving gedrukt. Je liep vaak voorop bij het nemen van initiatieven waarbij je het vuile werk niet schuwde en daagde mensen uit om mee te denken. Dat betrof het oplossen van organisatorische problemen, zelfs van examenreglementen en dergelijke, maar ook het oplossen van inhoudelijke problemen, zoals bijvoorbeeld het vinden van goede combinaties van vakken. En bij die inhoudelijke aspecten kwam ook jouw brede belangstelling naar voren en jouw belezenheid. Keer op keer was jij verbijsterd over het gebrek aan historisch inzicht van die Hollanders en hun geringe belangstelling voor hun geschiedenis. Of over aan het gebrek van belangstelling van economen voor sociale ontwikkelingen en de invloed daarop op economische gebeurtenissen. En vanuit je sterke betrokkenheid bij onderwijs zocht je ook voortdurend naar mogelijkheden om dat in het curriculum tot uitdrukking te brengen en zocht je ook naar onderwijsvormen om dat gestalte te geven. We hebben het nodige geëxperimenteerd. Maar met al deze zaken heb je inhoudelijk een blijvend stempel op het programma gedrukt, ook omdat je je collega hebt opgevoed in het belang daarvan. Dit alles zijn ook overigens zaken die in jouw eigen onderzoek naar voren komen. Inhoudelijk zeer breed, met verrassende dwarsverbanden, vaak getuigend van een grote maatschappelijke betrokkenheid en, dat is interessant, een verrassende belangstelling voor de onderliggende gegevens, waarbij de kwaliteit van de gegevens zeer belangrijk is. Ik proef hierin wellicht ook een grote invloed van Angus Madison. Goed, Chris. Het was natuurlijk niet allemaal roze geur en maneschijn. In je enthousiasme kon je soms behoorlijk voor de troepen uitlopen. En je geduld met doorknopers was niet altijd even groot. Dus je had wel mensen in je omgeving nodig die bereid en in staat waren om zo nu en dan wat plooien glad te strijken. Verschillende mensen in de zaal kunnen daarover meespreken, denk ik. En je vermogen om financiële administrateurs in verwarring te brengen, dat dwingt werkelijk bewondering af. In de faculteit herinner ik me de nodige sessies daarover. Maar die zaken werden weer snel vergeten als je dan weer werd meegesleurd in een nieuw uitdagend initiatief en je realiseerde wat er allemaal al was bereikt. Beste Chris, ik kan hier ook niet voorbij gaan aan het feit dat we samen een veel langer verleden hebben dan de afgelopen 30 jaar. In Groningen kenden wij elkaar al goed sinds eind jaren 70. We deden samen onderzoek en we hadden vriendschapsbanden. Onze eerste gezamenlijke working paper stamt uit begin jaren 80. En ik herinner mij nog hoe wij in Zuidhoorn liepen te discussiëren over UV-analyse, lopend achter de kinderwagen van Fransje, omdat het spreekuur van Annemarie weer eens uitliep. We hebben elkaars gezinnen zien opgroeien en elkaars wel en wee altijd met belangstelling gevolgd. En ook in Maastricht hebben we het nodige samengewerkt. Het meest recent nog in 2009. Ik denk daar met veel goede herinneringen aan terug. En wie weet, doen we nog eens iets samen in de toekomst. Tot slot wil ik memoreren dat jij als kort vakgroepvoorzitter bent geweest in een voor mij persoonlijk extreem moeilijke periode. Dat was toen de vakgroep Algemene Economie werd opgesplitst in 2 groepen die thans voortbestaan onder de naam AE1 en AE2. Jij hebt die scheiding mede begeleid en bent daarna meteen begonnen met het oprichten van de School of Governance, waar je heen bent vertrokken. Wat dat betreft geldt dat de 2 Belgische collega's die ik in de vakgroep heb meegemaakt, beide op enig moment zijn vertrokken naar een eigen instituut. En ik hoop dat je begrijpt dat nu wij een Belgische decaan hebben, ik mijn hart vasthoud. Welnu Chris, dit is jouw formele afscheid. Ik hoop dat we elkaar nog blijven zien, zowel professioneel als persoonlijk. En overigens blijft de naam de Neubourg toch nog aan onze vakgroep verbonden, heb ik tot mijn verrassing ontdekt. Dus dat geeft jou extra reden om ze nu en dan toch nog eens ons op te komen zoeken. Wij zien daarnaar uit. Het gaat jou, Jo en je kinderen goed.
Dan geef ik bij deze graag het woord aan professor de Neubourg. En het zal u niet verbazen dat inderdaad, normaal gezien de afscheidnemende hoogleraar wordt toegesproken na zijn oratie, maar dat risico wilden wij niet lopen. We wilden ook, met de zekerheid hebbende ons woord te kunnen plaatsen en thuis te zijn voor ten 12e, het woord eerst nemen. Maar Chris, met zeer veel plezier, graagte en uitkijkende naar wat je ons te vertellen hebt. The floor is yours.
Wel, het is ook de gewoonte dat we elkaar bedanken nadat alles is uitgesproken. Laat ik dat toch maar eerst doen voor ik begin te spreken. Overigens heb ik mijn afscheidsrede in het Engels voorbereid, dus ik zal hierna in het Engels voortgaan. Maar ik wil eerst toch, voor ik helemaal op het einde dank u wel zeg tegen iedereen, heel erg Johan en Philippe bedanken voor de warme woorden en helaas op sommige punten de waarheden die naar voren zijn gekomen. Dear friends, dear colleagues. For a long time, I told my students that every child is born in an income distribution, and it's bound largely to stay there for the rest of his or her life, until she dies. That seems true for most countries in the world. It also seems true for most developing countries in the world. It also seems true for most local economies. Today I want to explain to you why I will not make that statement any longer. Not that the statement is completely incorrect, but it's inaccurate. And I would like to explain that to you. I will do that by exploring the sources of inequality and the mechanisms that explains everybody's place in the wealth distribution in the world and in the local economies and the changes therein. This research is inspired by some of my own research work the last years, but also by the research questions that my own children bring to the dinner table. And as you heard from Philip, dinners are usually with a large number of people, so there's a lot of discussion going on. And these questions relate to the role of health and wealth endowments in newly born, to the role of resilience in shaping the future of children and adults, and in the relationship between executive functions and socioeconomic background among children. Now, this gives you already some flavor of where I'm going. I will use a PowerPoint presentation. I will make a story, but it's mostly figures and graphs, not a lot of text. One of the things that Philip and Johan, well, Philip can't know this, but Johan knows, that when I had my inaugural lecture, I was the first one at that moment, some years ago now, to use a PowerPoint presentation in the big auditorium at SBE. But I used it to project the French text of what I was saying in Dutch at that time. And it was Denis de Krombrugge who was sitting behind the dashboard to make sure that everything goes well. So this is how the world has changed. I can now do it myself. So I learned something in these years. I will start my exploration by referring to two big debates. One is nature-nurture, and the other is on the reproduction of social and economic inequalities over generations. I will then add some new insights, and hopefully by combining these things, saying something about the sources of inequalities and the changes therein. Partially I do this, and since Philip already mentioned it, I was not planning to say so, but I will anyway now, because I promised my daughter to give her some ideas for her PhD thesis, which I hope I will do during this lecture today. Since I don't want to stay behind this desk, and since I remind Madonna falling off the stage during the Brit Awards in February of this year, I would like to take off my beret and like to take off my gown so I can move around. Because I don't want to move around with a long dress, because compared to Madonna, I have far less experience in walking around in long dresses. Moreover, my dress is not made by Armani like Madonna's dress was. So let me do that first. Put another microphone on so I can move around. I promised to put my gown on the more formal part of my speech. I said I will start by using two nature-nurture debates and the other debate on the stickiness of social inequality in societies. And these are all debates, and I will start with nature-nurture. Let's see if that works. It does. This is basically the story of nature. Nature says everybody is endowed, born with some qualities, and if you look at the distribution of the qualities, it's largely normally distributed and random. And we can color, because we will need that later on, this randomness, by putting all the people with high wealth at red and those with low wealth in green and those in between in blue. And I will use this property later on. So that's the story of nature. That's the extreme position of nature. By the way, the debate on nature and nurture began, referring also to what Johan said before, to John Locke in 1611, I think, when he introduced something like, okay, he criticized in his essay on morality, criticized Descartes, because Descartes was speaking about an innate thing, was denying the innate existence of God in man. And Locke said, okay, it doesn't make any sense to me. He was highly criticized, and it will take until the end of the 19th century before the idea that everything is ingrained in nature, including God, disappeared. And it was Francis Galton, who was, by the way, a half-cousin of Charles Darwin, who was bringing this to the forefront by examining the heredity of longevity. So people that lived long, also their children lived long. And that was the first time that things was brought into that shape, and the discussion started that. The discussion now became completely obsolete, but let's first, it took enormous discussions, a lot of empirical research, and very fierce dogmatic positions at both sides. It was really people, if we are now irritated sometimes by our colleagues, by that time they were nearly killing each other. And I'm sure there has been some dueling at that time in the 19th century between professors at universities. But let's take the nurture position, which is a very different position. It says, okay, everybody is born more or less the same, and then things happen, life goes on, and everybody finds its place sooner or later in the distribution, one way or another. And likely enough, this looks more or less like a normal distribution that, again, we can color in colors, with people high wealth on the left-hand side, right-hand side for you, and people in green with low wealth on the left-hand side. And so, why is this debate obsolete? It went on until, say, 10, 15 years ago. Not anymore now. Why is that? Because of two new innovations. One is epigenetics, and the other one is fetal programming. Epigenetics is the part of our biology and medicine colleagues who study how DNA changes under influence of the environment. I say it's simple. They talk about histones and a lot of things that I don't really understand. But what I understand is that environment, it's now found that environment has an impact on our DNA, and that the DNA changes, and because of DNA changes, neuron changes, and because of that, brain changes happens. This is happening over the last 10, 15 years in research. The other thing is fetal programming. It's the part of the research that empirically investigate how in uterus, so during pregnancy, changes in fetus happen due to changes in the circumstances. And it's quite frightening to see how serious these changes are. Now, if that's possible, if nature changes by changes in the nurture, in the environment, then the debate, what is nature, becomes obsolete, really stupid. And in the end, Shakespeare is right. Because Shakespeare wrote in 16, I don't remember, somewhere in the 17th century, the end of the 17th century, in The Tempest, he let Prospero describe one of his housemates as a devil with a nature on which nurture will never stick. So already Shakespeare saw that there was this kind of nature and it could stick, nature could change that, only not with devils, and that was his housemate. So that was the first debate. Its debate is important to see because it shapes the future of the next debate that we will have. And that's the one, oh no, I want to introduce something else. Another idea that we, as economists, of course, we never talk about it. And I would like to declare today that this idea is obsolete as well. But the ideas behind this, I find every day in my work. And this is simplistic economic thinking. The economists say everything is about choice, the simplistic economist, none of the people here in this room, of course. Everything is about choice. Life is about choice. And of course, you're born in an income distribution, but if you make the right choices, then things go well. Well, you can be poor, and because you make poor choices, you will stay poor, but for most people, this won't happen. What will happen is that everybody will make choices, and they will change their choices and so on, and sooner or later, they will find their place in the income distribution, which looks more or less like this. And people at the right-hand side of the graphs will ever get richer. That's normal. Now, so it's a simplistic view. This simplistic view comes back in ideologies and in discussions in every country in the world where we discuss social changes, or where we discuss, like we do currently in Guinea, Conakry, and in Morocco, where we discuss reforms of the welfare state. Maybe it also comes up in the discussions in the reform of the welfare state in the Netherlands or in Greece. Just some thinking about. Because what does this say? It says, well, the positions of people are the position they deserve. It's a position that comes out of their choices. And people that are the green and the light blue ones at the left-hand side is because they made the wrong choices in their life. People on the left, they deserve to be rich, deserve to be red, because they made the right choices. Now, I would happily declare this simplistic economics view as obsolete, but it's not. And it's still shaping the way, some way, that we have our political discussions. But the more interesting is the debate that was going on in the last century, basically. I think this is too nice. A special view of the simplistic view is the American dream. It's people coming up from the bottom, making the right choices, and grow and glow at the top. So nice, empirically, completely nonsense, but nice to let's see and to say that the dream is there. But the real problem is the following. The problem is about reproduction of inequality. And I will come back to that later on. What happens in people's life is that people are born, indeed, in a distribution. And in the next stage of their life, and I leave it to you when you say that, or where you put that, then people find themselves more or less at the same place. There are a couple of people that move up, and a couple of people that move down. There is upward and downward mobility. But in the end, the distribution stays pretty much the same. And that goes on in the next phase of your life, and on in the phase thereafter. And this is what it looks like, and except for only these couple of people that have been moving upward and moving downwards, this one person here that was moving downwards, the distribution at the end of people's life is more or less the same. And even if you see that across generations, the distributions stay the same. And this is the problem that was studied for about 100 years on the stickiness of the inequality that is in society, on the reproduction of the inequality over the generations, and about the lack of social mobility. Now, there has been there's hundreds and hundreds of researchers and thousands of publications on this subject. When I was, again, preparing this for this lecture, I came across a lot of familiar names. Some of these names are good, dear old friends like Jasper Esping Andersen and Miles Korek and the late Peter Townsend and then Hammermush. And some people were people that I always followed with interest because what they write is important or is mostly important. Like people like Jim Hackman, I need my glasses, Tim Smeeding, Tony Atkinson, Gary Becker, and Bob Havener. These are the names that I come across. And authors, also to my surprise, also authors that I already read when I was a student. When I was a student in my bachelor and my master degrees. People like Christopher Jenks, Robert Vogel, Sam Bowles, Herbert Gintes. And even some colleagues. I came across publications of colleagues like Buster Will and Lex Borgans. It was a joy to read it and reread it again. What do they do? I'm not going to take you through my joy and all the reading, because then indeed we won't be home before dinner. But basically what the research does is they either measure the income of fathers or the occupational status of fathers or the educational attainment of fathers and compare it with those of the sons. And I say fathers and sons. Of course, you would expect to see parents and children. But up to like 20, 30 years ago, that was not very relevant because women never made social mobility. At least not never. Not the never of my picture. So some people move up, but most people stay. And so that was one of the critiques that came up. Like there was a lot of other critique which I will skip. There's a lot of data problems with it. You can imagine that trying to have an income measure for a father and a son of the same family and trying to combine that, it's pretty challenging and often criticized for not being accurate. Overall, the picture is that income distributions are stable over generations. People that are poor when they are born die poor. And not poor, but die not in big wealth. So in general, my first statement that I state to the students is probably to a great extent true. That's at least what comes out of the research. And so that's one of the things. The other things that comes out is that most mobility is upward. There's very little downward mobility, which is fine because down there is a lot of people. Up there are not that many people. So people move upward and that makes social mobility still happening. There's this interesting publication by Clarkson and Cummins 2 years ago in the Economic Journal. What they did, they looked at surnames that they could find in the annals of municipalities in 1859 in the UK and followed the descendants of these families all through 2012, which is an amazing work. I mean, must have been, I hope they had research assistants, because must be, but they did it. In the last 10 years, they could rely on big data that are in municipal archives. But before that, nothing is of course on computers, so you have to find it out by hand. But what does it make? What does it result in? Is that from all the families that were on the top in 1859, nearly all of them, it takes 10 generations to come down to just above the median in 2012. So that's how downward mobility works. It works, it goes down, but it doesn't go down to the bottom, or it doesn't go down, it doesn't spread all the entire distribution. It goes down to the upper part of the distribution, and it goes very slowly, 10 generations. So that's interesting. So, but honestly, that's the empirical things. What we are really interested in today, for given the results, given the title of the lecture, is about the explanations. And here I put a lot of authors, otherwise I forget people. And it's about the explanations that are interesting. The first real explanation that was given in economics terms was by Gary Becker, won't surprise the economists among you, and his explanation was purely economic, purely financial even. It's very simple. Parents invest in their children. In Gary Becker's work, you don't have to even be an altruistic parent. You can be just a parent only interested in your self-interest, but that's a sideline. You invest in your children, and if parents have more resources, they will invest more in their children, so children from parents with higher resources will end up higher in the distribution. Simple as that. It's a financial transmission mechanism. Solon in 2004 added to that, wait a minute, it's not only the volume of the investment which is important, it's also the efficacy of the investment. And he found that when you make investment in people with higher education already, the returns of the investment are bigger than when you make the same investment with people with lower education, which if you think twice, it makes sense. But still a financial transmission mechanism. Esping Anderson and Heckman brought in another element. They brought in social and cultural capital and what Heckman calls non-cognitive capabilities, which, by the way, if you compare them, are the same. Esping Anderson and Heckman were not the first to bring this in. I mean, social and cultural capital comes in discussions, especially since publications of Bourdieu in the 70s, very early in sociology and especially in sociology. They brought it to economics, and that makes it more important for discussions, for the public debate. And said, okay, all these things are important. And what are non-cognitive skills? It's about know how to dress yourself, how to behave, how to speak, which in the English environment is very important, how to speak, how to behave in all kinds of situations, how to take opportunities that are existing, and life skills in general. And that's what comes in there. This is all summarized in a theoretical framework, which is formalized for the first time put on paper by Bob Haveman and Barbara Wolf, and then later on adjusted by Schätzner and Altzinger, and has this scheme. It has parents' abilities in education. They both have an input, they have an influence on the income of the parents and on the hereditary flow, and it goes from this hereditary flow to the ability of the child directly. So there is a nature component. I get something from my father or from my parents. Family income goes there as well, and family income goes into different things, and I will explain in a minute. The important part parents do is they make what it's called home investments. And basically, it's the quantity and the quality of time time and goods that you invest in your children. And goods can be education. And that leads, these home investments leads to an increase in ability of the children, an increase in formal education. Later on, they make post-school education investments as well, so that add to it, and all that increases income. And then, of course, family income, because we have to take care of the idea that distributions are very sticky. family income feeds in all these levels. It feeds in the input, on the input side, at the final school level, and at the final income of the children themselves. So this is already a lot more elaborate than the Gary Becker's type of thing, but still, it didn't satisfy me. And it didn't satisfy me for both intuitive reasons and for things that I newly discovered by reading other material, especially material outside the realm that I know, and it's economics and sociology. And especially reading epidemiological literature and reading, stimulated by some of my family members, neuropsychological literature. And these insights make the thing work, but we have to make some efforts first before we can make it work. What we miss, and there is another point, what we miss is three things. What we miss basically is first, the dynamic character of human capital investment. This is something that was brought in a recent article by Cunha and Heckman in 2007. And what they said, I will explain in a minute, but what they said is that investment is not just investment at any point in time. It's investment that builds, especially in human capital, that builds on the previous investment. The role of exogenous conditions. When I take this framework to the country context in Botswana or in Laos, it's pretty useless, I can tell you, if you want to use this framework to try to explore, try to put everything together in inequality terms in countries like that. The main thing what is lacking here are the external conditions, the conditions exogenous to the family, and are pretty stupid conditions, at least for us, stupid conditions, because we never think about them. The access to safe water, the access to adequate sanitation, food security, all these kind of things, but the absence of war and conflict. These are the things that are the external conditions, but are nothing to do with the decisions of the families or the investment families make, but they have an enormous impact on the outcome, of the economic outcome for each of the families and the way they are exposed to it. And of course, I can now say already, because I introduced epigenetics and fetal programming, how important malnutrition, illness of the women, of the pregnant women is for the quality of the baby that comes out. So babies, and because of all these things happening in pregnancy, and that's the reason why my statement in the beginning was inaccurate. I should say, at birth, all babies are more or less the same. No. At conception, people are more or less the same. And then things start to happen. And it starts already to happen, and we have to take that into account. But let's first introduce, and that's the last new thing that I will introduce, some points about executive functions. And executive functions, and I take a big step now, I refer to neuroscience, pick out the most important part for our understanding of what we try to understand today. And these are the functions that are located in the prefrontal cortex, part of our brain, and that develops already in the fetus and controls or act on everything that is really important in our life and for success in life. There are three main executive functions: inhibitory control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. These are the three things that we're shortly going to talk about. And we all three need this in order to be successful in life. Inhibitory control is about self-control. It's about not acting on your immediate impulses. And it's also about control of information that comes in. So it's about inference control. You control the type of information that you allow to enter your brain and to be used for action or for everything. This is a basic thing that we all hopefully use and need in order to be successful and to gain in life. It's, and I quote Diamond here, Dale Diamond, in a recent article, an excellent overview article, by the way. is being able to control one's attention, behavior, thoughts, and emotions, to override a strong internal disposition or an external lure. That's what it is about. The second executive function is working memory. Working memory is our capacity to take information and use the information immediately for problem solving. That's not the same as short-term memory. Short-term memory is somewhere else in the brain. It's not in the prefrontal cortex. It's situated somewhere else, and it only stores the information. In working memory is what we use to learn. We see information and we use it to solve a problem. We use it to make the next step in our learning. It's crucial. Working memory is a crucial skill that we all need, and all of us have used and still use to be able to function and to be successful. The last, cognitive flexibility, is one that builds on the two others. It comes later in life. That means usually it's observed around in the teenage ages. And it needs already a developed inhibitory control and a developed working memory in order to work. And this is what makes us think out of the box. But it's also what makes us understand other people. What makes us feel empathy for people. And it's also what makes us feel, what allows us to function spatially. Because if you look at a picture and you stand before the picture, then you all know that if you walk around that picture, you will have the back of the picture. The picture will not be the same anymore. That's, of course, that's very basic. Children do not know that and have to learn that. And this spatial, this understanding of the spatial, the spatial room around you and your position in that room is crucial for making progress. Now, these things are all things. Why are these important? Research linked the function of executive functions to a lot of things. Again, we changed something on our axis. We put performance on executive functions high, again red, and those with low performance, bad performance in green. And then, again, when things happen, people are changed and sorted again, and what you get at the end, after some time, is something which still has most of the red balls at the top and the green balls at the bottom. And it's linked to mental health. The lower all the green balls have more problems with addiction, with hyperactivity deficit, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, with conduct disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. More people are obese, are overeating, are substance abusers, and have poor treatment adherence when they are ill. Later on, it also helps school or refrains school readiness and school success. People with lower performance in executive consumption functions are less ready for school. And it's even overriding the effect of pre-med and pre-reading before you go to school or your IQ. It is also a school success. Executive functions, it would be the ideal way of select students in the future at the faculty, Mr. Dean, is use just executive function tests because they predict almost perfectly the success in competence and math and reading. So probably also in economics, something we could try. We can do an experiment here. And we can do even random control trial. Why not? Success, it has a lot of more impact. It is about marital harmony. I like the expression being faithful to romantic partners. It's very modern, I think. It's also about job success. People with lower executive function performance are less able to find jobs, to keep their jobs. They earn less, and so on. Public safety, crime, reckless behavior, violence, all these things. Racism is very much linked to people with low executive function performance. And people with higher executive function performance usually feel much happier in life as well. So this is all very important. Okay, we have to. I cannot speed this up, can I? Yeah, I can. So What is needed for executive functions? Well, the answer is, in short, rich parents. Well, it's not completely true, fortunately not. But the answer is, we don't know. I would like to say rich parents, but it's simply not true. We don't know. There's very little research on how it actually builds up. There is some research on the negative impacts. We know that drinking and smoking during pregnancy has devastating effects on executive functions of the children. Stress has a bad influence on the executive functions of adults and children alike, and low birth weight has also an impact on on executive function performance. Neubourg, and that's not me, found also out that that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, has an impact on your working memory. So does malnutrition also as well. That puts everything also in a developing country context. We say, when you have malnourished children, and just to remind you, about 40% in general of sub-Saharan children between 2 and 5 are stunted, meaning systematically malnourished. And stunting is not only the effect of malnourishment, but is also neglect in terms of not caring when you're ill and so on. But 40% of these children. This means that 40% of these children most probably have problems with executive functions. If that's true, these children will drop out of school. 40% of children dropping out of school 20 years from now is 40% of your labor force, which is untrained. 20 years from now, most of these countries think they will be middle-income countries. That's the constant that you find when you talk to politicians. So it really has a big impact on everything. The dynamic properties of human capital investment, I'm going to do that very short, saying that it's self-reinforcing and cross-fertilizing, meaning that the investment that you make in one of the capabilities have an influence on the other capabilities, a direct impact. So cognitive investment has an impact on non-cognitive or on executive functions. The other thing is dynamic complementarity. That's what I just said. If you already invest a lot of in human capital, the next investment is yield much higher returns than when you didn't make the first investment. That's also why nearly all programs, policy programs, that try to help disadvantaged people at later age fail. And it's a waste of money. If you would invest the same amount of money, and there are experiments around that, for people that are not disadvantaged, the returns, the economic returns would be very much bigger. And of course, you can have moral comments on that, but it's, I think, a result that we have to take into consideration. And it's something that should guide us in our making of our scheme, in our theoretical framework that we want to build. This it's a nice picture. I'm not going to discuss it, but it's amazing thing is this blue and the red part. The blue part is a part where cognitive and non-cognitive elements come together in a good way. The red part is where it bad may, and it predicts, like almost perfectly, when whether people are smoking at daily smoking at age 18 or not. And it's incredible because with people in the lowest decile of non-cognitive and lowest decile of cognitive skills, the probability is almost 1, which is an amazing result, I think. The conditions are important. Okay, very shortly. Conditions are important because we cannot assume that if you have enough money, you can buy the products that you need. If that would be the case, we would not need to bring in conditions. Because then you would be able to say, well, people that have enough money can buy everything they need for their children, enough food, enough education, healthcare when they need it, and so on. But unfortunately, it's not true. And, okay, I put Belgium over there. These are figures for Belgium. Belgium is not particularly a developing country, isn't it, Philip? It's, okay, Nevertheless, and if we look at the bottom of the distribution, we find that about 15% of the Belgian children, these are children, not the full population, 15% of the Belgian children are poor, living in a poor family. 11.2% of the children in Belgium living under deprived conditions. And you see that K is 3, for those who know the literature, means that the children have to have at least 3 deprivations. And 3 deprivations out of a list of 7 that I will shortly show later on. And so you see that you have children that are deprived, but not poor. And you have poor children that are not deprived, have everything they need. So income, or being poor, is not a good predictor of whether you're deprived as a child, even not in Belgium. Of course, it's worse in Botswana. And I have Botswana here because it's the last country. Last week, these results are really fresh from the press. It's the last country we did the research in. These are, by the way, results from MODA type of analysis, and MODA stands for multiple overlapping deprivation analysis. And here you see that in Botswana, half of the children are deprived. But they're not necessarily living in poor families. Some of them are deprived because there is simply no school, so they can't go to school. And it's not, they could afford to go to school, but there is no school. Or they don't have safe water, and they don't have adequate sanitation, and they don't have healthcare facilities. So their deprivation is driven not by the income of their parents, but it's driven by the fact that the conditions are just bad. And Botswana is one of the best countries in sub-Saharan Africa, just to tell you. Let's forget about Finland. Let's look at Orapa there. It doesn't have to be everywhere like this. Orapa is a mining district in Botswana. And look at these figures. Only 5.26% of the children are living in poor families in Orapa. That's less than Finland, which is, apart from Iceland, the best performing country in the European Union. 0% is deprived. 0. We never found it. I thought it was a mistake when we got all the things there. Impossible. Let's do it again. Let's go through the starter files and do it again and again and again. But it came out. So we called people in Botswana from the statistical offices. What's happening here? Is this measurement error? Is it just your survey which is not good enough? They say, no, it's a mining district. They say, yeah, okay, explain to me. Well, they say, everything is taken care of by the mining company. In the district, the mining company builds schools, hospitals, look for safe water, provides adequate sanitation, and so on. And they pay very well. Because Orapa, you don't want to live there unless you work in the mine. It's in the middle of the desert. And of course, I saw that while looking at the map, but I thought, okay, there are other parts of Botswana which are in the middle of the desert, which produce much worse figures. So that is to say, we can change it. We don't have to take these outcomes for granted. So, and that's how we do it. And now it becomes like the fancy dart, and this is my contribution to my daughter's dissertation for the time being. This is the framework that brings these things together. The first thing about the framework is that it's a multi-generation, it's a life cycle model. Life cycle model is the way I call it. Jim Heckman calls this a multi-stage technology, which it's not very beautiful, but it says multi-stage because it has all the stages in life. And as a good economist, it then goes further and it says, let's assume there are 2 stages. That's nice, I think. And of course, there are many stages. The stages start at conception, which is important, not at birth. And it goes on, until death in the end. This is the life cycle model, and this is the way we have to conceive it. That also means that we will have to use overlapping generation models or some kind of Markov chains technology in order to estimate that empirically, which will be a challenge to a neuropsychologist, I suppose. And then there are 3 major things, which is cognitive abilities, executive functions, and a health stock. Health is important. I mean, some people have bad luck and are born with less health stock than other people. But you can invest. It's an optimistic story. You can invest. You can invest parental behavior during pregnancy, especially health and nutrition behavior, and the conditions during that pregnancy, whether it was a drought or not, whether water and sanitation was there. Because if water is not safe, most probably the mother gets ill by drinking the water. And when the mother gets ill, and so on and so on. So, and on top of that, the light blue arrows is what is our dynamic properties of human capital investment, meaning that they are reciprocal and dynamic complementary, as long as you estimate it or as you model it in different stages. And then you have both parental behavior. Later in the life cycle, you have your own behavior. It has to come in somewhere. People make their own choices, they have their own behavior. And you have the conditions. And this is especially public conditions. This is where our social policy is. In developing countries, but also in our countries. This is what we change in our contribution if we change our input in these conditions. And in the end, it's health and wealth. I added health because of this. I will skip that. Because of this. This was what I showed you earlier, but in fact, this is the reality. The people at the bottom don't live that long. So they die earlier. And you have to take that into account in order to make your framework encompassing so that you can use it in developed and undeveloped countries. I think I had more to say. Yeah, well, this is an amazing figure as well, but I will not say it. I will not do it because it will take too long. And we can talk it, well, maybe not under a beer, but in another seminar or something that I'm happy to do. I promised to put my gown back on. I will do that now because I would like to, I will switch that off. I would like to say a couple of more formal words on when I leave this university. In the end, I worked 30 years here, which is quite some time, I think. And so I think I should, and this is the reason why, to the amazement of my colleague and friend Johan Maaske, I give a valedictory lesson after leaving de facto 5 years ago. Is because I wanted to leave by the front door. I just not want to sneak out. I just wanted to leave by the front door, take the opportunity to say something, and probably also to put some interesting ideas on the table that we can work out, maybe in publications together, Johan. So I go to the more formal part. Friends and colleagues, I had a great time over the last 30 years here at the economics faculty in Maastricht. There has been the challenge and the excitement of being part of the small group that initiated and started the faculty and the teaching program, including being the first chairman of the exam commission and having the honor to have one of the students to have taken me to court up to the Supreme Court level. Fun. I learned a lot. There has been a start of the international orientation of the faculty by starting the exchange programs, the founding of international economic studies. The new initiative to set up the MSc in social protection financing, and later on the elaboration of that in the Maastricht Graduate School of Governance in 2004. I list these things not to claim the credit for these projects, because all these projects have been invariably turned out into a success because so many people worked on it and worked on it together. But I list these projects to show the tremendous amount of trust that I received from the faculty and from the university. I want to say how privileged I felt, and I still feel, by the support I received. I want to express my gratitude for the trust and maneuvering space that I enjoyed over my years in Maastricht and at Maastricht University. It has been a fascinating journey as far as I'm concerned. I also want to thank all the people that I had the privilege to work with. I wanted to thank you all by name, but honestly, I started to make a list of people I shouldn't forget on my list, and the list became so long that indeed we wouldn't be home before midnight. So I decided to say thank you to you personally during the reception and naming categories of people rather than individuals, hoping that I don't forget one. These 30 years have been a great, especially because I had the privilege to work with so many great people. There are, of course, the academic colleagues of SBE, and the other faculties at the UM, and of the School of Governance. There are also the colleagues of the administrative and the support staff, and the faculty, the school, and the central administration. You know how I always appreciated your dedication and your work. If my work has not been ended in absolute chaos, it's thanks to these people. There are also my friends and my colleagues from the ILO, from UNICEF and the other international organizations, who were often patient with me and with faculty, but always very supportive. And there are the master and PhD students who I had the privilege to work with. Their warmth, their open-mindedness, their unbelievable levels of energy have inspired me. I thank you for everything that made these years so valuable. I also want to say a special word to my family. Jo, Sebastian, Elise, Kiki, and Fritz. We laugh a lot. We do crazy and serious things together. You have contributed to my life in so many ways that I do not know where to start. But I can tell you one thing. If the title of this lecture would have been Searching for the Sources of My Happiness, we would be at the reception for long, because the lecture would just contain 5 names, yours. So thank you for that. It is amazing, as over the 30 years, there have been so small a number of periods that have been characterized by major setbacks and conflicts. In fact, even if I try hard, I can only remember one period. This was the period between October 2008 and the summer of 2010. And despite the impact it had on the School of Governance and on myself, I never made any public statement on this period. And I was planning to talk about this for a couple of minutes now, because I want to make that public statement. Because I think I owe some explanations to the friends who I never explained what really happened. Let me make one warning. If I refer to the university board or to deans, none of these people is today in function anymore. So I refer to other people. These are not the people that currently are part of the university board or are deans of faculties. When the university board suddenly at the end, and it was really suddenly, of 2008, decided to take away my responsibilities as the academic director of the School of Governance, the explanation was, and I quote the letter, "Under your leadership, the Maastricht Graduate School of Governance has ended up in difficult financial circumstances," suggesting mismanagement without calling it. What was happening was the following. In 2005, 2006, 2007, the University Board wanted the Graduate School of Governance to give scholarships to a number of PhD students rather than a salary. Every year again, before the implementation of that policy, I have asked the rector whether it still was the board's policy, and every year again, the rector confirmed. There were also several written proposals by the University Board to the University Council, saying that this would be the future policy of the university. In 2008, the summer of 2008, the University Board changed its point of view. And a few weeks later, the board changes the decisions on the School of Governance retroactively, meaning that all the students, the PhD students, who at that time were on a scholarship, were given a salary back starting from 2005. Of course, I don't have to tell you that this was done without a warning to, let alone a discussion with, anybody at the School of Governance. The operation costed several millions of euros, and the costs have to be paid by the School of Governance. So what happened? The University Board asked me to come up with a financial plan for paying back the debt. And despite the fact that we were kind of flabbergasted by this beautiful example of good governance, we nevertheless started to work and made a financial plan. Anne-Marie Rima, the managing director of the school at that time, and myself worked out a financial plan. And that plan basically rested on paying back the debt using the future income of the PhD defenses. This plan was not accepted by the board. And the reason, I quote, and I quote the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Science at that time, he says, "It is doubtful whether there will be a single PhD defense at the School of Governance in the years to come." Since that day, there have been 55 PhD defenses at the School of Governance. The university the board, nevertheless, at that point in time, accepted the advice of the dean, and I guess they were right. In the end, nobody knows, like the dean at that point, how difficult it is to get researchers to defend their thesis, since, as far as I could find, he never succeeded in doing that himself. At that time, president of the university told me there were more things. And I quote, "Some deans see the School of Governance as a threat to the reputation of the university." That's what he told me. I considered that as a very strange statement, since both the master and the PhD students were doing well. Students were attracted from many universities abroad, they appreciated the program, and despite the heavy workload, most students finished the program in the scheduled 12 months. More often, at least, than the students from other master programs at the university. Once graduated, they easily found jobs. 15% of the students were accepted in PhD programs across the world. And most of them work in research jobs at banks, private companies, international organizations, and research institutes. Just to give you an illustration, 6 months ago, I gave a seminar at the World Bank. Among the 40 people in the audience, 8 people were graduated from the Maastricht Graduate School of Governance. Just illustrated that I didn't understand really how we can be a threat, or the school could be a threat, to the reputation of the university. The MSc program was also the first program that was accredited in the first round by the NVAO. And 6 years later was re-accredited with very positive reward. But again, despite all these successes, I guess the university board was right in taking the warning of some deans seriously, because deans know the risk of damaging the reputation of the university by losing accreditation. In the end, my role as academic director was ended, a new academic director was appointed, and 1 year later another one. I was asked to keep on working for the School of Governance to guarantee continuity. I foolishly agreed. Peter de Gijzer, as the last independent dean of the School of Governance, did what he could to help the school and myself. But he had to bow to higher powers as well. Rumors were spread. Rumors are still here, I heard today. Rumors were spread about conspicuous consumption and opulent luxury at the School of Governance. It was suggested that the renovation of the building at the Kapoenstraat was incredibly expensive. In reality, the price per square meter was lower than the price of the renovation of the building of the Faculty of Social Sciences, and just slightly higher than the price of the renovation of the University College. You may wonder why we didn't fight harder. Well, we did fight, and we won a couple of battles. But again, especially legal battles. Annemarie Rima was not fired by the university board, although they wanted to do that. But a court prevented it, fortunately. And there were other battles we won. But in the end, legal instruments are futile against egos playing power games. You also may wonder why we did not try to bring the school under UNU merit. Well, we tried very hard. But at that time, director of the UNU merit only wanted to have the School of Governance, or host the School of Governance, if we would get rid of our PhD programs. That would have meant firing many people and making all the PhD students at that time homeless. I refused. Few weeks after I took leave of absence to go to UNICEF, the School of Governance was incorporated in UNU merit, including its PhD program. And the initial, reluctance of UNU merit to host the PhD program didn't prevent UNU merit to celebrate in November 2014 the 50th PhD defense at school very joyfully with Tom Poes. Just to make the story complete, UNU merit roughly implemented the financial plan that had been developed by Annemarie Rima and myself. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I shall not hide how painful this period has been for me. Only Jo and Sebastian, Kiki and Fritz, and Elise know the real impact it had on me. I'm sure I would have been able, not to go on if their love and their support have not been there. The pain is over. Don't worry, the pain is over. Scars are still there. But more important today, and that's how I want to end, is the good things that came out of it. First of all, it gave me the opportunity, which I probably would not have taken otherwise, to accept the job offer as Chief of Social and Economic Research at UNICEF in Florence. I had to work in a great organization, standing for an important cause. I was surrounded by a great team of researchers, some of them coming as graduates of the Maastricht Graduate School of Governance. Some of them are still working for me, by the way. And some of you visited me in Florence, and you can acknowledge that living there didn't feel exactly as exile. The second good consequence of the events was that after my retirement for UNICEF, compulsory at age 62 in the United Nations, they gave me the freedom to accept the job offer at TIAS and Center in Tilburg, at Tilburg University. Being active there makes me happy. Sure, it's not a rose garden either, but I can feel the good vibes, and I'm grateful for the opportunities that TIAS and Center are giving me. Most of you here in Maastricht will not be surprised to hear that I would like to run a little bit faster than what's actually feasible. But still the perspectives of new endeavors are very promising. The third good consequence of the events in Maastricht relates to my research today. As the Director of Research of the Brussels office of EPRI and ESPRI, I have the opportunity again to work with a great team of 15 researchers to work in several projects in 10 countries, ranging from China to Botswana. The most important consequence has been linked to Maastricht itself, by the way. During the entire period, a relatively short period, I had a conflict with the deans of some faculties, especially with the dean of the faculties of humanities and sciences, and with university board. But I was never in conflict with the rest of the university, with you. Quite the contrary, many of my colleagues, very many students and PhD students, fellows, and a big number of the administrative staff, also at the central level of the university, stated their support for me. My good friends and colleagues were always there to iron the ploy, as Johan would say, so to listen to me and give me advice. As a matter of fact, I felt never alone, and I felt not as isolated from the people at the university. That support during these difficult days has meant a lot for me, and I'm immensely grateful for that support, and for the friendship that I experienced, especially during that period. I will stop talking, but not without making two wishes, because I promised that to Philippe, to the university, to SBA and the university. Building on my experience, I want to express two special wishes to the university and to SBA in particular. First of all, that you may have the courage to keep on being innovative in research, to keep being leading in learning. And I have to confess that despite being a very early and fierce defender of the PBL system, I'm convinced that the time has seriously come to innovate again. It's time to realize that PBL was something that was invented in the previous century, actually 50 years ago, in the 60s. I remember 20 years later, in 83, my colleague and friend Johan Muiske built our first portable computer together. Its price was outrageous. Its weight was 10 kilograms. And on a good day, with good weather, it could handle a simple OLS regression in less than an hour. We have updated our equipment since then, and it's about we updated our equipment and our technology in PBL as well, I think. My second wish relates to graduate education. Currently, the Graduate School of Governance is housed in a building that is more or less forbidden territory to master students. This illustrates that UM still doesn't understand what real graduate education means. It is not understood that graduate education, graduate teaching, is more than an extra year of bachelor's teaching. It's graduate teaching and graduate education is about creating a research and learning community where master students, PhD fellows, junior and senior researchers, lecturers and professional practitioners meet, discuss, drink coffee, hang around together, can chat about the weather, the politics and their research problems, and can do that in coffee corners, kitchens, around printers and in lounges, seminar rooms and sometimes classrooms. And in a building that is open 24/7, which I think is essential. That is the way graduate education is made around the good universities around the globe. It's not what I see in Belgium as the Netherlands, and it really concerns me. Because I'm afraid that if we go on, and it's not typically a Maastricht problem, not even typically a Dutch problem, I think it's a continental European problem. If we go on like organizing graduate schools like this, or graduate education like this, what will happen is what we already see happen. Our best undergraduate students will choose to go away to real graduate schools, which is fine, as long as other graduate students, excellent undergraduates, come to us. And that doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen enough. And so in the end, I'm afraid a lot of Dutch and Belgian universities will become undergraduate colleges. Very good ones, but undergraduate colleges, which I think a pity, because the potential is there to make a better world there. Dear friends, dear colleagues, when Rainer Werner Fassbinder was asked a couple of weeks ago by an interviewer in The Guardian, what was the worst and the best of Scotland when turning his last moving Macbeth over there? And then he answered, the whiskey and the whiskey. I could paraphrase him about Maastricht, but I will not do that. Because the worst of Maastricht I told you about, and the best of Maastricht, that is you. Thank you.
Going to deviate from the protocol once more. Chris, I'm way too young to have enjoyed those lectures and your early stages here at the school, which I regret. But I want to say two things. More than ever, I realize that we, and I personally, we're going to miss you here at the school. Second, we owe many more thanks than could have been offered or worded today. I cannot look forward to agreeing with you as an administrator, and I cannot look forward to disagreeing with you either. But what you've said, I take very seriously. If you refer to the biggest challenge of the School of Business and Economics in innovating PBL, that's exactly what we try to do right now. And we are convinced that we have become indeed, as PBL, a bit too classical, too lean and mean, too factory-wise. So we are doing all we can, together with many people in the faculty and especially the younger faculty members, supported by the older faculty members, will opt for that kind of change. Now, how to implement the change, that's another challenge. But there is consensus that yes, Chris, we will follow you in your advice here. Second, I do share, and I think we do share, the concern about graduate school and graduate education, master and postmaster level. And we are often not helped by that in the country or in the setting we live, and with the vision that others who do sometimes determine policy have. But yes, we continue, we take up the glove and we'll continue the struggle. Chris, I want to thank you. Thank you on behalf of the faculty and the university for the things you have done, and those have been mentioned. But most of all, and I'm very personal now, but I also dare to speak as a dean, and hopefully, I'm pro-rector today, I take the opportunity, and Hildegard will control for that. I hope I can also speak as pro-rector. Yes, Chris, you leave this building through the big door, the open door, the front door. The door will not be closed behind you. You will always be welcome at this university, and especially at our faculty. But the biggest thanks today, and it is a thank you right now, thank you for the things you have said. I thank you wholeheartedly for taking the opportunity, to go back to that nasty period, 2008, 2010, to voice your opinion, and I'm not going to enter in a discussion. That is not the point, and I'm not well placed to do that. But I thank you for having spoken so clearly, so transparently, and for having voiced your views on that and your story. And this, I think, please, a show of hands and a big applause, because this is indeed not only courageous, but it is saying what needs to be said. And there will be other views, and other people will have other views, but that doesn't matter. Thank you for having voiced that. Congrats.